Mike Tyson sat at the head of a sleek black marble dining table in his sprawling Las Vegas penthouse, the city's dazzling strip glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows like a taunting mirage. Once a titan of industry, he'd clawed his way from nothing to command a multi-billion-dollar casino empire. Money, power, everything a man could dream of. But that night, his untouched steak grew cold as the clinking of crystal glasses and the murmur of shallow chatter echoed through the cavernous room. Across from him, his wife, Vanessa, sipped her Chardonnay, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond him. To her right, their son, Ethan, hammered away at his phone, muttering into a muted call about stock prices. Their daughter, Chloe, scrolled through her tablet, a martini glistening beside her, oblivious to the man who'd built this gilded cage. Earlier that day, the news had hit like a sucker punch. Pancreatic cancer, terminal, 3 months tops. He'd stumbled out of the doctor's office, numb, the neon glow of Vegas blurring into a cruel joke. His fortune, his legacy, suddenly worthless against death's cold grip. He'd hoped telling them would spark something, tears, a flicker of love. "I'm dying," he rasped, voice cracking like shattered glass. Vanessa glanced up. Ethan's fingers froze for a heartbeat. Chloe sighed. "What now, Dad?" No shock, no grief, just a void. In that moment, Mike realized his empire was a house of cards, and his family? Strangers wearing his name. The air in Mike Tyson's Las Vegas penthouse hung heavy, thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and unspoken betrayal. The strip's neon pulse throbbed beyond the towering windows, a relentless heartbeat mocking the man who'd once owned this city. Mike sat rigid at the head of the table, his broad shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow worse than the cancer eating him alive. 3 months, that's what the doctor had given him, delivered in a sterile monotone that still echoed in his skull. Pancreatic cancer, terminal, a death sentence wrapped in clinical jargon. He'd built an empire of casinos, turned dust into gold, but now, staring at the faces of his family, he felt the ground crumbling beneath him. Vanessa, his wife of 20 years, swirled her wine, her manicured nails glinting like daggers under the chandelier's glare. Ethan, their eldest, typed furiously, his Bluetooth earpiece flashing as he muttered about mergers. Always the empire, never the man. Chloe, their princess, flicked through her tablet, her lips curling in a bored sneer, martini glass sweating in the desert heat. They were his blood, his legacy, or so he'd told himself. He'd waited all day to drop the bomb, clinging to a fool's hope that it might crack their polished masks. Dinner dragged on, the clatter of silverware a hollow soundtrack to his unraveling. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "I've got something to say," he growled, voice rough as gravel, cutting through the room's indifference. 3 pairs of eyes flicked up, Vanessa's cool and detached, Ethan's impatient, Chloe's faintly annoyed. He sucked in a breath, the weight of it burning his chest. "I went to the doc today. Pancreatic cancer, terminal. Few months left." The words landed like a gunshot, sharp and final. Silence swallowed the room, a suffocating void where he'd prayed for something, anything human. Vanessa blinked, her brow creasing for a split second before smoothing out. "I see," she said, voice flat as the desert horizon. She reached for her glass, the wine trembling slightly as she lifted it. "Well, you should slow down then. Let the company coast." Ethan didn't miss a beat, his fingers resuming their dance across his phone. "Yeah, Dad, we've got it under control. Rest up. Hit the Bahamas or something." Chloe sighed, louder this time, eyes still glued to her screen. "Seriously, Dad, what is it now? Just enjoy whatever time's left, okay? No tears, no gasps, no hands reaching for his. Just a transactional shrug, like he'd announced a bad quarterly report." His chest tightened, not from the cancer, but from the gut punch of truth. They didn't care. He wasn't their father, their husband. He was a signature on a will, a vault they'd been waiting to crack open. Mike's chair scraped back, the sound a jagged scream against the marble floor. He stood, towering over them, his shadow stretching across the table like a phantom they couldn't be bothered to notice. "Excuse me," he muttered, the words bitter on his tongue. No one asked where he was going. No one looked up as he stormed past the penthouse's gilded walls, past the framed magazine covers, hailing him as Vegas's king. The elevator doors slid shut behind him, and he punched the button for the garage, his knuckles white against the steel. He had to get out of this tomb of wealth, out of this lie he'd lived for decades. The Mercedes roared to life, tires screeching as he peeled out into the night, the strip's lights bleeding into a furious blur. Where was he going? He didn't know. But he couldn't stay here, suffocating under the weight of their apathy. What happens next? Will Mike find redemption in the desert's shadows, or crash harder than ever? Here's the deal. If this twist has you hooked, drop a 1 in the comments and subscribe. Let's ride this roller coaster together. Not feeling it? Smash that like button anyway and tell me why. Want a wilder turn in the next chapter? Shout out your craziest idea. I'm reading every word. Buckle up, because Mike's story is about to explode, and you won't want to miss where this runaway train derails. Mike Tyson's fists clenched the steering wheel of his Mercedes G63, knuckles white as bone, as he tore out of the Las Vegas penthouse garage. The strip's neon kaleidoscope flared in his rearview mirror, a garish farewell to the empire he'd bled for. A kingdom of casinos, cash, and cold-hearted strangers he called family. The news of his terminal pancreatic cancer still burned in his gut, 3 months ticking down like a bomb. Vanessa's icy stare, Ethan's distracted muttering, Chloe's bored sigh, they'd gutted him worse than any diagnosis. He'd built them a palace, draped them in wealth, and they'd looked through him like he was already a ghost. The penthouse doors had slammed shut behind him, and now the engine roared, a primal scream against the night as he floored it, leaving the glittering lie of Vegas in the dust. The city's edges frayed fast. Towering glass gave way to cracked asphalt. Billboards faded to rusted husks, the pulse of civilization thinning with every mile. Mike didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay. The desert loomed vast and merciless, swallowing the road ahead in shadow. His headlights carved a jagged path through the dark, the hum of the engine his only companion. Memories clawed at him, decades chasing power, nights spent counting zeros, a life measured in stock tickers instead of heartbeats. Now, with death's hand on his shoulder, it all crumbled to ash. His family's indifference wasn't a surprise. It was a mirror, reflecting the man he'd become. Alone, untouchable. A king with no court. The road twisted, narrowing into a ribbon of ruin, the last streetlights flickering out like dying stars. The dashboard glowed red, a silent warning he ignored. His mind was a storm, regrets howling, questions crashing. Was this it? A legacy of marble floors and empty promises? The car jolted hard, a bone-rattling thud ripping through the silence. The wheel yanked right, tires screeching as he wrestled for control. Metal groaned, the SUV swerving, skidding, then lurching to a stop on the shoulder of a desolate stretch. Dust billowed, choking the air as warning lights flared like blood across the dash. Flat tire. Mike slammed his fist against the wheel, a guttural curse tearing from his throat. He grabbed his phone, dead, useless, a brick in his hand. A bitter laugh escaped him, sharp and hollow. Perfect. Stranded in the middle of nowhere, a billionaire brought to his knees by a puncture. He stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, the desert wind biting at his tailored jacket. The horizon was a black abyss, the faint chirp of crickets the only sound in this godforsaken void. No headlights, no help, just him and the wreckage of a life he couldn't outrun. Then a flicker, 2 shapes moving in the distance, silhouettes under a sputtering street lamp. Mike tensed, his city-honed instincts flaring. Friend or foe? In this wasteland, it could be either. His pulse hammered as they closed in, their voices cutting through the night. Young, light, alive. The desert had thrown him a lifeline or a trap, and he was about to find out which. The Nevada desert night pressed in around Mike Tyson, a suffocating shroud of darkness and dust. His Mercedes G63 sat crippled on the roadside, its flat tire a mocking wound after his furious escape from Las Vegas. The strip's neon glow was a distant memory, replaced by the eerie flicker of a dying street lamp casting jagged shadows over cracked asphalt. His phone was dead, his empire irrelevant. Here he was just a man, stranded, with the ticking clock of pancreatic cancer drumming in his chest. 3 months left, and he'd bolted from a penthouse full of strangers who'd shrugged at his death sentence. Vanessa's cold nod, Ethan's distracted glance, Chloe's sigh. They'd shredded him, and now the desert seemed ready to finish the job. He leaned against the SUV, breath ragged, the wind clawing at his tailored jacket, when movement caught his eye. Two figures emerging from the gloom. Mike stiffened, his city-sharpened instincts screaming danger. In Vegas, shadows meant trouble. Thieves, hustlers, predators circling a wounded king. But as they neared, the street lamp's weak glow revealed them. Two boys no older than 12, their scrawny frames dwarfed by oversized jackets, sneakers scuffed to threads. Their laughter cut through the silence, light and reckless, a sound so alien to Mike's world, it stopped him cold. "Hey, mister," the taller one called, his voice bold, curious. "You okay?" Mike's jaw tightened, suspicion warring with exhaustion. "Flat tire," he grunted, eyeing them. "Don't know how to fix it." The boys exchanged a glance, then burst into laughter. Not cruel, but wild, like he'd just confessed to forgetting how to breathe. "For real, man?" The taller one, Joey, grinned, stepping closer. "All that fancy car, and you're clueless?" Mike bristled, a retort rising. "I've built empires, kid." But it died on his tongue. There was no venom in their tone, just raw amusement. The shorter one, Sam, nudged Joey. "Chill, we got this." No hesitation, no bargaining. They just moved. Like helping a stranger was as natural as the desert wind. Mike watched, stunned, as they darted to the trunk, hauling out the spare tire and tools he'd never touched. Their small hands worked fast, jacking the car, loosening bolts, skills honed by necessity, not privilege. "Where'd you learn that?" Mike asked, his voice rough, almost lost in the night. Sam shrugged, tightening a lug nut. "Old man Hector, down the road. Fixes stuff. Taught us." Joey smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Said you gotta know how to survive out here." Survive. The word hit Mike like a fist. He'd survived the boardrooms, backstabs, billion-dollar deals. But this was different. "Why you out here anyway?" Joey asked, squinting up at him. "You don't look like you belong." Mike's throat burned. How could he explain a life collapsing under its own weight? "Needed to get away," he rasped, the truth spilling out raw. The boys nodded, accepting it, no questions asked. "Well," Sam said, standing, "you're not stuck now." The tire was fixed, the car steady, and Mike stood there, a billionaire unmoored, staring at two kids who'd just handed him something he'd never known. Help, free of strings, in a desert that owed him nothing. Mike Tyson's Mercedes growled to life, the new tire humming against the cracked desert road, thanks to Joey and Sam, two kids who'd patched more than just rubber in the dead of night. The Nevada wasteland stretched endless and unforgiving, a black void swallowing the faint glow of Vegas he'd fled hours ago. His chest still burned from the sting of his family's apathy. Vanessa's wine-sipping indifference, Ethan's phone obsession, Chloe's eye-rolling dismissal of his terminal cancer. 3 months left, and he'd roared out of that penthouse prison, only to break down here, where the rules of his empire didn't apply. The boys' laughter lingered in his ears, their casual kindness a splinter under his skin. "There's a diner down the road," Sam had said, shrugging. "We're hungry." Mike, still reeling, nodded. "Lead the way." The neon sign flickered into view. Helen's Diner, a weathered outpost glowing like a lighthouse in the desert's abyss. Its faded cursive buzzed against the night, promising refuge or reckoning. The boys shoved open the glass door, a bell jangling sharply, and Mike followed, his polished shoes stark against the chipped linoleum. The air hit him hard. Grease, coffee, the sizzle of bacon, a gritty hymn to a world he'd never known. Booths sagged under years of use, walls plastered with yellowed photos and newspaper clippings of a town the world had left behind. Behind the counter stood Helen, mid-50s, apron-stained and steely-eyed, wiping her hands like she'd just wrestled the stove into submission. She clocked the boys first, her voice a gravelly drawl. "You two again? Didn't I just feed you this morning?" Sam grinned, hands in his pockets. "Yeah, but we found this guy, flat tire. Fixed it." Helen's gaze snapped to Mike, sharp as a hawk spotting prey. His tailored jacket screamed Vegas money, a billionaire out of his cage, and her eyes narrowed, peeling him apart. "That's so," she said, crossing her arms. Mike cleared his throat, the weight of her stare pinning him. "They helped me out. Owed him a meal." She studied him, a predator sizing up an intruder, then, unexpectedly, her lips twitched into a smirk, real and unguarded. "Well, sit your ass down. I don't let folks leave hungry." The boys whooped, sliding into a booth, and Mike hesitated, the leather creaking under him as he sat. Helen returned, slamming down plates, pancakes towering, eggs golden, bacon crisp, steam curling up like a dare. It wasn't the sterile elegance of Michelin-starred Vegas. It was messy, alive, a meal meant to be felt. "So," Helen said, leaning against the counter, "you from around here?" Mike's pulse thudded. He could have spilled it. "I'm a dying casino king, my family's a pack of vultures." But the words stuck. "Just passing through," he rasped. She nodded like she saw the lie but let it ride. The boys dug in, laughing, and Mike lifted his fork, the first bite hitting him like a revelation. Warmth, flavor, something beyond the cold transactions of his life. Helen watched, her smirk softening. "Lost, huh? You're not the first." Mike froze, fork midair, her words slicing through the armor he'd worn too long. In this diner, under her unflinching gaze, he wasn't a titan, just a man, teetering on the edge of something he couldn't name. The neon hum of Helen's diner buzzed in Mike Tyson's ears, a lifeline in the Nevada desert's black heart. The plate before him, pancakes stacked like a fortress, eggs spilling over, bacon crackling, steamed in the dim light. A stark rebellion against the sterile luxury he'd fled. Hours ago, he'd peeled out of Vegas, the Mercedes roaring past the strip's hollow glow, his family's indifference, Vanessa's wine-soaked detachment, Ethan's phone fixation, Chloe's scoff at his cancer, fueling his escape. 3 months to live, and they'd treated him like a stock dropping off the board. Now, stranded in this nowhere town after a tire blew, he sat with Joey and Sam, 2 kids who'd fixed his ride without a second thought, their laughter a jagged contrast to the silence of his penthouse. Mike's fork hovered, the diner's warmth pressing against the ice in his veins. Helen leaned on the counter, her steely eyes tracking him like she could see the rot inside. Pancreatic cancer, chewing through a billionaire who'd thought money was armor. Across the room, a couple chuckled softly, their voices weaving through the jukebox's twang. It wasn't the forced elegance of Vegas high rollers. It was real, unscripted, alive. The boys shoveled food, Sam nudging Joey with a grin. "Told you Helen's the best." Mike's chest tightened, not from death's grip, but from something sharper. These kids had nothing, no mansions, no jets, yet they radiated a richness he'd never touched. Then, he saw it. As they finished, the boys slid from the booth, darting outside where an old man teetered on the curb, his cane trembling against the cracked pavement. Without a word, Joey steadied his arm, Sam guiding him across the street, their movements fluid, instinctual. The man nodded, gratitude lighting his weathered face, and the boys waved it off, laughing as they vanished into the night. Mike froze, coffee cup burning his hand. No payment, no fanfare, just help, pure and reckless. In Vegas, every favor had a price. Here it was free, a currency he'd never traded in. His mind reeled. Vanessa wouldn't glance at a beggar, Ethan wouldn't pause his calls, Chloe wouldn't lift her eyes from her screen. He'd built an empire on transactions, but this was wealth carved from dust and decency. He set the cup down, the clink loud in the quiet. Helen caught his gaze, her smirk fading to something softer, knowing. "They're good kids," she said, voice low. "This place, it's not much, but it's ours." Mike's throat burned. He'd ruled cities, owned skylines, but here in this diner's glow, he saw what he'd missed. A pulse, a bond, a life that didn't tally on a ledger. The desert wind howled outside, but inside, he felt the first crack in his old self, a tremor of something new clawing free. What's next for Mike? Will this spark ignite a fight for redemption, or will his past drag him back? If this twist shakes you, drop a 6 in the comments and subscribe. I'm spilling the next chapter soon. Not vibing? Hit that like and tell me why. Guess where Mike's headed? Wrong answers get a shout out. Right ones might steer the story. Don't blink. The desert's about to burn. Here's a 600-word rewrite of Key Point 7, continuing Mike Tyson's journey from the Las Vegas to desert narrative. Crafted in a high-stakes, cinematic American style, it amplifies the drama as Mike returns to the desert town with a mission, transforming it and himself against a backdrop of suspicion and raw emotion. The tension peaks as he battles his past and his looming death, with no call to action included. The Nevada desert sun blazed mercilessly as Mike Tyson's Mercedes roared back into the dusty town, tires spitting gravel like gunfire. Days ago, he'd limped away from Helen's diner, shaken by Joey and Sam's tire fix and the gritty warmth of a meal that cost him nothing but his pride. That night had shattered something. His escape from Vegas, from Vanessa's cold shrug, Ethan's phone-addicted apathy, Chloe's dismissive sneer at his terminal cancer had landed him here, where kindness didn't come with a bill. 3 months to live, and he'd spent decades building a casino empire that meant nothing to the strangers wearing his name. Now he was back, not broken but blazing, a billionaire with a death wish and a plan. The desert wind howled, but Mike's pulse thundered louder. He wasn't here to wallow. He was here to fight. The town sprawled before him, a patchwork of sun-bleached shacks and rusted relics. Its people squinting as his SUV rolled in, a black beast against their faded pickups. He stepped out, suit sharp as a blade, sweat beading on his brow, the cancer's ache gnawing at his gut. Joey and Sam lounged by the diner, their easy grins faltering as they clocked him. Polished, powerful, a stranger no more. "You rich or what?" Joey called, voice edged with doubt. Mike's laugh was a low growl, sand whipping around him. "Something like that." He didn't linger on words. He moved, a man possessed. By noon, the ground trembled. Trucks snarled in, a convoy of dust and steel, construction crews spilling out like an invading army. Hammers slammed, engines roared, and the town braced itself, caught in the storm of his will. The old gas station crumbled under bulldozers, rising anew as a community center, walls climbing fast, a fortress of purpose in the wasteland. The vacant lot, a graveyard of weeds, morphed into a shelter. Concrete foundations poured, beds and kitchens taking shape, a lifeline for the lost. Helen's diner shuddered as crews swarmed, expanding it, neon blazing brighter, a beacon to feed the forgotten. Mike stood in the chaos, sleeves rolled, barking orders, his voice a whip cracking through the din. Money poured from his accounts. Millions. A river of cash he didn't need where he was going. This wasn't a handout. It was a reckoning. A middle finger to the hollow legacy he'd left in Vegas. The townsfolk watched, fists clenched, eyes hard. "Rich bastards don't do this free," a grizzled man snarled, stepping forward, his stance a challenge. "What's your game?" Mike met his glare, unflinching, the desert sun searing his face. "My game? To leave something worth a damn, not just a pile of chips for vultures to pick over." The man's jaw tightened, doubt warring with the evidence. Bricks stacking, roofs rising, a town reborn. Helen emerged, apron dusted with flour, her smirk cutting the tension like a knife. "You're for real, huh?" she said, arms crossed. Mike wiped sweat from his brow, the cancer's weight dragging at him. "Dead real," she snorted, turning back to her diner. "Guess I'll need more pans." Joey and Sam darted past, grins breaking through their wariness, kicking up dust as they ran. The town didn't trust him, not yet. Whispers hissed. "He's buying us. He's using us." But as the sun bled red across the horizon, the structures stood undeniable, a testament in steel and sweat. Mike's chest heaved, not just from sickness, but from a fire he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't one of them, not by a long shot. But as the desert swallowed the day, he knew. This was his shot, his last stand, to build something that outlasted his name. The desert sun sank low, casting long shadows over the Nevada town Mike Tyson had remade. The community center stood tall, its fresh paint gleaming. The shelter buzzed with life, families settling in. Helen's diner shone brighter, feeding souls as much as stomachs. Weeks ago, he'd roared back here, a billionaire fleeing Vegas's hollow glow, Vanessa's icy dismissal, Ethan's phone obsession. Chloe's scoff at his pancreatic cancer, driving him into the night. 3 months, the doctor said, and he'd poured every ounce of himself into this dust-choked nowhere, trading casino chips for something real. The townsfolk had eyed him warily, Joey and Sam's grins turning cautious, Helen's smirk masking doubt. But brick by brick, he'd earned a flicker of trust. Now, the cancer clawed harder, a beast he couldn't outrun. Fatigue sank into his bones, coughs racked his chest, and each step felt like wading through tar. Time was slipping, and he knew it. That morning, he'd woken in a rented trailer, sweat-soaked, the pain a knife twisting deeper. Helen found him slumped on the diner's porch, her voice cutting through the haze. "You look like death warmed over." Mike smirked, weak but defiant. "Close enough." She didn't push, just hauled him to the hospital. An hour's drive through barren flats, the Mercedes left behind. The sterile room closed in, white walls and beeping machines a cruel echo of the life he'd escaped. Then the door swung open. Vanessa strode in, heels clicking like gunfire, her face a mask of obligation. "You should have told me sooner," she said, voice flat, eyes scanning the room like it was a bad investment. Ethan loomed behind, glancing up from his phone. "We'll handle the estate. Rest easy." Chloe hovered, barely looking at him. Should have died in Vegas, not here. They stood there, a tableau of indifference. And Mike's chest burned, not from sickness, but from the final cut of their apathy. They left without a backward glance, vultures circling a corpse not yet cold. Then, the room shifted. Joey and Sam burst in, their usual bravado muted, eyes wide. "You look like crap," Joey blurted, and Mike's laugh rasped out, frail but real. Helen followed, slamming down a basket, homemade soup, bread, a stubborn act of care. "Hospital slop will kill you faster," she growled, her roughness a lifeline. One by one, they came. Shelter residents, construction crews, faces he'd once been a stranger to, now etched with something like love.